This is Blanton's. And if you didn't already know that, you're probably not that into bourbon. So let's review it, give it a Brewzle score, and at the end of this video, see how it stacks up against the other bourbons we've tried. So let's look at the bottle and see what it tells us. Blanton's, the original single barrel bourbon whiskey. This bourbon whiskey dumped on 4/6/20 from barrel number 164, stored in warehouse H on rick number 35. Individually selected, filtered, and bottled by hand at 93 proof. We believe this is the finest bottle of whiskey ever produced, affording you extra flavor, bouquet, and character. Each bottle is recorded with the master registrar at Blanton Distilling Company. This registered bottle is number 100. Distilled and bottled by Blanton Distilling Company, Frankfort, Kentucky. Blanton's is extremely highly sought after for several reasons. First, it's got a fantastic bottle. Just look at that hand grenade shape. Second, it's got these collectible stoppers on top. There's 8 different ones, each with a little letter that spells out Blanton's. You can't get just one, you have to have all of them, and then its place in popular culture. John Wick decides to use this for a painkiller, then all of a sudden, everybody has to have it. So this is one of those bottles that folks that are just getting into bourbon really like to hunt for, because it's not everywhere, but you can oftentimes find these guys. It's made by Buffalo Trace, checks in at 93 proof, and this was the first mass-produced single barrel bourbon on the market. A lot of people that like to prove they're really into bourbon love to hate on this guy because of the demand and how many people are looking for it, especially folks that maybe have never even tried it and don't know whether or not it's a good bottle. We're going to review this on the 5 criteria that I think are most important, and the first is aroma. That 93 proof is not overwhelming, so you don't get a ton of ethanol on it. A lot of just red fruit sweetness. Like, that is just a really, really solid nose to me. Like, this is what I'm looking for. These are all the flavors that I'm looking for when I'm evaluating a bourbon, because these kind of bright red fruit apple notes are what I find particularly appealing. So on the nose, as they say, that has to be a 7. And the next criteria is flavor. Blanton's delivers on a lot of those flavors you get on the nose. I get a little cherry, a lot of kind of apple like brightness to it, almost like a pear. And again, that's really what I'm looking for in a bourbon. So I'm gonna give the flavor a 7. And the third criteria is complexity. Blanton's is not a particularly complex bourbon. I get some sweetness and then it just kind of dissipates. So it's not all necessarily one note. It does kind of give me that bright sweetness at the beginning and then dissipate into a little oak. So a little bit of complexity. But if this is the first review of mine you're watching, we definitely skew more toward higher proof whiskey, and this being 93 proof is not exactly that. So on the complexity scale, it's gonna get a 4. And the fourth criteria is mouthfeel. Like, how viscous, how thick is it? How well does it coat the palate? You can see that it does kind of coat the glass a little bit. For 93 proof, typically you're not gonna have a fantastic mouthfeel. It looks better on the glass than it feels on the palate, so I'm gonna give it a 5. Now, Uncle Nate in our Discord swears that the higher Rick numbers on these actually mean something. This particular bottle is Rick number 35, and when I was blinding it against another bottle I have that's like Rick number 76, the 76 did win in that particular blind. And so his theory is that the flavors are similar, but the higher Rick numbers tend to have more extreme flavors and maybe a little better mouthfeel. He calls them honey barrels. I don't know if that's true. It's just a theory we're working with, but in my blinds, the few bottles I have open, we couldn't find any evidence to the contrary. This one being kind of right in the middle, the mouthfeel is about average. The next criteria is finish. What does it leave you with after you finish drinking the whiskey? It evolves a little bit, but it just doesn't leave me with an exceptional finish. I get just a little bit of heat on it. It dissipates pretty quickly. It's not unpleasant, but it's not really much of anything. I'm gonna give it a 4. That gives this Blanton's a Brewzle score of 27, which makes sense. It's a total of 50 points. This is just slightly above that midline, which I think is exactly what bourbon's supposed to be. A great middle of the road bourbon that most folks are going to enjoy. Now, not something you need to just like spend your entire life seeking out, but if you come across a bottle at 60, 70, 80 bucks, worth picking up and giving a try, because it's really hard to hate on the whiskey that's inside this bottle although a lot of folks can hate on the hype. Now, let's check and see how that Brewzle score stacks up against the other whiskeys we've tried. That 27 puts Blanton's right up above Puncher's Chance, but just below the Michter's Toasted Barrel Sour Mash.